Hello to all and welcome to the fourth recording for my YouTube channel. My name is Raleigh Tutor and I've created this channel to discuss my books, which are titled The Dichotic Dilemma, and the many issues raised within the books, particularly pertaining to our human existence. It's a very new channel and I'm still figuring things out as I go. Whether I'm just going to be reading from the books or making it relevant and discussing current affairs. And I probably think that's the best way to go. And so that's what I've decided to do today. I want to discuss the issue of Breonna Taylor and the sentence of those police officers in America. It's very relevant to my literature and very relevant to the many reasons why I've started this YouTube channel. And I hope I can explain the situation as I see it, as well as I see it in my mind in this video. What was fascinating for me today was I was watching CNN and they were discussing the Breonna Taylor sentence and the subsequent fallout with the two police officers being shot and the protests in the street. But something that stood out for me was a tweet by LeBron James that they featured on this CNN piece. And that's very interesting for me because just about last week when I was contemplating this YouTube channel and I had a lot of reservations and fears about doing it because of the controversial issues that I discuss, race, etc., and putting myself out there, my thoughts and opinions, and potentially taking away from my anonymity out there in the world as people potentially start to hear my words and my thoughts. I was terrified because when I did write the books initially, especially the poems which I discuss in the books, they were very strong and at times controversial. And my wife actually read one of the pieces coincidentally, and it really scared and terrified me because I am much removed in many ways from the anger and the frustration that I felt when I was writing that literature. But when I saw LeBron James's tweet, I saw the relevance of that piece. And this is what LeBron James had to say. The most disrespected person on earth is the black woman. I promise you, I'll do my best to change this as much as I can and even more. Love to you, queens, all over this country and beyond. That was interesting for me because the poem that my wife had read had a similar theme, which I'll read for you now with some reservation, because as I say, I'm finding this challenging myself because discussing race can be a very thorny issue, and I still have to go out there into the world. And I don't know what people are going to think about what I have to say. But I suppose my commitment to the work I want to do is bigger or greater than my fears. So I'll read the piece. Know your adversary, black sister. Your adversary, your primary adversary is the white woman, for she is confusing your man. Her very nature is making your man lose interest in you. He has no time for you anymore because you value yourself, and he is choosing to drink the cheap wine that caused him to be drunk and poisoned till he does not even know who or what he is. Your secondary adversary is the white man, for he's subjugating and taking away the pride of your men. He's making them weak and have no confidence in themselves. They cannot support their homes anymore and have no direction, leaving your children destitute. The white man is also surreptitiously injecting your men and yourself with an even more sinister poison that is rendering us all as people mentally and physically destitute, beaten and broken. All this is leaving you to fend for yourself as your men are incapacitated right now, for they are attacked on two fronts, rendering them both weak and confused. If one does not get them, the other will, and you just bear the brunt of the confusion, and at times you get confused as well. But you are strong, you've always been. You're still here. We are still here because of you. You're still producing soldiers and raising them by yourself against all the odds and the most ardent of adversity. You still persevere and prevail. For you are strong. You are our survival. Yet for what I do not know. However, for your effort, you deserve a prize at the end of the road. For such a struggle has to be worth the price. This message is for the real black women still standing out there. Your struggle is being noticed. It has to be somewhere, our struggle as a forsaken people. For if not, then the very effort is the height of purposeless and senseless futility. In the book, to explain the poem, I then go on to say, this poem speaks of a time of subjugation. Hate creates hate. I do not want to live in a world that causes people to see these visions and have such opinions of each other. I fear my own thoughts as I read this and wonder where my consciousness was that I could view the world in such a manner. Such vicious perceptions of another do not bode well for humankind. These are the perceptions of a mind at war, a man at war, and in war no one wins. When the mind is under the right influence, it sees a better world and can consequently conceive a better world. If the mind sees enemies, there will be war. When the mind sees a common thread, there will be understanding. At that point in my life, I guess it is fair to say, I was in a warring mindset. I very much believed in myself as black, different and separate from everyone else, especially the whites. And this is what I then identified as the dichotic dilemma as I wrote the books. The concept of duality, which I deepen in the book after this one. And it's through seeing the world in that way, understanding the concept of duality, understanding the dichotic dilemma and what it means, which is a constant revelation for me as well. Then I saw a clearer world, a better world, that leaves me here today shocked at the thoughts and feelings of that young man and who I would have been if I hadn't challenged them, if I hadn't sublimated that anger and frustration in such a positive way as writing the books. But the Breonna Taylor issue speaks to something far much deeper, a structural issue. We certainly have inherited from the past a world that was created to benefit others over some. And we are in a capitalist system. And in many ways, this is fronted up by the United States of America. So it's not a surprise in a way that this massive culture war, this Black Lives Matter movement, is happening in America. America is truly, for me, the epitome of the dichotic dilemma. Everything about that country, on one hand, proposes to be this place of enlightenment where everyone can be free, and yet so many live in bondage, even today, through the prison system. And that brings me to the Breonna Taylor matter. And to think that the reason she was killed in her own bed, where she should feel most secure, by the police who were meant to protect everyone, was because of an apparent drug charge. Could have been marijuana, cannabis, or something to that effect. And to think that so many people have lost their lives over this issue, when alcohol and cigarettes can be freely bought, and I can leave this computer right now and go to a shop and buy as much alcohol as I can. Yet people are being arrested for using drugs or a substance that is just, can be as deleterious to your health, I suppose, as alcohol. But one can argue that the effects of alcohol are probably even worse. I've only ever puffed cannabis, and it really excoriated my lungs, so I couldn't do it. And I've often asked people who've taken other types of illicit drugs what the feeling is like. And it's always some kind of description of some level of disinhibition, quite in the same way that alcohol causes disinhibition. So my question is, why is alcohol permitted and everything else is not? Especially when the cost of this fight against drugs, as it were, is so high and people are dying. The amount of people that have been incarcerated and have had their lives derailed because of a drug charge. At heart, I suppose I'm a libertarian. I believe in people's absolute freedom. And I genuinely think that if these drugs, for example, were legalized, this whole issue would be gone. And the irony is people are doing these drugs anyway. But more importantly, I was watching a program just last week about the history of the prison system in the UK, the female prison system. And one of the ladies they profiled who was arrested was so drunk when she was arrested and had been perennially drunk that she didn't even know that her 4-year-old child had been dead in bed for months, and she lived in absolute squalor. Alcohol has done that. So I wonder what the moral argument is for alcohol being legal when everything else is not. And the high price that society is paying for things that people are doing anyway. When some of these police officers, the politicians, the judges and the lawyers are probably partaking of these substances themselves. After all, they're only human beings. It seems insane that we live in a world like this. Who is it benefiting? And it leads me to say that we need to rewrite our whole system. We need a new system. As human beings, above all other creatures or beings, we actually have the agency to create our own future. No other creature that is within our realm of existence can do that. We can. And now America seems to be tearing itself apart over these issues. And the divisions are being deepened by, of course, the way, unfortunately, Donald Trump is dealing with these matters. And all for what? The law surely should be there to make people's lives better. But in this instance, it seems to be protecting those who are being empowered and have the power to go out there and take people's lives over the most meaningless things, as having cannabis, for example. And we do know of the history of the classification of how drug offenses are punished, with crack having a harsher penalty than pure cocaine, if I'm correct. Of course, crack being that which is used more by blacks. So ultimately, we need to upend this system. We need to create something new. Capitalism seems to be broken. In many ways, it is. And the question is always, what do you replace it with? I don't know. But in moments of strife, it's probably good to say it creates an opportunity for reflection. The point is, if, for example, prohibition, which was in America in the 20s, had been there till today, we would be getting arrested. Or people like Breonna Taylor would be getting arrested for having alcohol in their house. Can you imagine that? So, who is being served by these laws? Who is being served by this seemingly skewed morality? And the countless number of people who have been arrested, and the war on drugs, when quite frankly, all those resources could be being used to treat people. And ultimately, it seems the effect of any substance abuse is from overuse. I don't see the crime in having a bit of cannabis. But most importantly, I don't think that people need to be having their doors knocked in whilst they sleep by police wielding guns, and then a poor lady getting murdered, a young lady in her 20s, over an issue about drugs. It's utterly insane. America proposes itself to be the model democracy and the example for everyone in the world. So perhaps if there's a place where the change is going to come or has to start, then I'd say it is America. In many ways, America is the capital of the world. We are in the American empire, the greatest military ever assembled, with military bases everywhere in the world. This is America's world. So I'll probably say to Donald Trump or all those people in America, this is an opportunity to challenge the fundamental nature of your country. And the great thinkers of civil rights struggle, in many ways, who changed the life of people like me, came from America. It's a very unique country, and it's got a unique position of influence in the world. So if there is going to be a transformation, perhaps it starts there. And I'm only here because I've managed to see the world not from a place of anger and hatred and confusion as I did before, or pain, the same pain that led LeBron James to send that tweet. And more importantly, I've disentangled the matrix of duality that creates the divisions we see in the world. Race, racism, hatred, love. The dichotic dilemma. And it's something that I personally believe that if people start to truly understand, they can perhaps, or we can perhaps overcome the challenges as a human race that we face, caused by the phenomena of duality, in many ways as I have described it in my books. I hope that made sense. I remember when I used to follow these cases of a black person gets killed and the police gets let off, I'd be just so devastated, just so demoralized. But now I can see through that duality. It gives me a reference point to be able to understand, without judgment or hatred, the position of the police, even the position of the legal system that's protecting them. Because in many ways, one could argue they were just doing their job. Whether they were doing it rightly or wrongly, that's probably why they get away with it. But once they put on that uniform, just like a soldier, or even a Nazi soldier, they were just doing their job. Then the question becomes, how do we change that? Now you're talking about interrogating the system. So as I've said, this is a point of reflection. And it's been an incredible year already. We've had the wildfires in Australia, the greatest on record, I think they've said. In California, the fires are blazing. We've got the coronavirus. Without being dramatic, but there could be something in the air. A moment to sense capitalism itself is under threat from the coronavirus. Because if it carries on, how are we going to keep our economies alive? The furlough program gets cut. How are people going to pay their bills? What if the coronavirus lasts till next year and we don't get a vaccine? Or the vaccines are ineffective? What happens then? Boris Johnson is fighting to keep the economy going. but we're facing greater challenges. So maybe it's time to rethink everything. In many ways, as much as they say capitalism has been successful, it's been a terrible failure for many parts of the world because a lot of the spoils in capitalism are enjoyed by very few and in select places, particularly in the West. So has it worked really? I don't think the poor Africans in Kibera or Soweto would say it has. In England, we've had austerity for years. NHS workers and public sector workers suffering for the banks being bailed out for a recession they caused. And then they get away with it scot-free after being bailed out by the taxpayer and still enjoy the same profitability that they had before. When the normal person on the street has to have a wage freeze lasting years whilst the cost of living increases, the property market rises. 2020, this could be the moment when humanity shifts to a new consciousness. Well, at least that's what I hope for. And that's what, in the deepest parts of my heart, I believe. But whether that comes to fruition, then that's life. And at this stage, all I can do is make these YouTube videos. And so be it. So, I'll read on from where I left off yesterday. And what it says in the book is that I will now outline my position. Initially, I'll declare my position by saying, above all, I'm a human being, which I believe to be the utmost realization one can make. Not a black man, or an African, or any other description, but a human being. It's a universal concept that breaches and transcends all subdivisions by which we can stand against each other. On that basis, a human being and humanity becomes something much greater than its individual parts, presentations, and subdivisions. I believe that the basis for understanding is observation. Observation and logical balanced deduction. On that basis, I proclaim my position as I look to discuss the phenomenon of human existence as simply one of an observer, an outsider looking in. I propose to offer a neutral expose based on my understanding of the concept of the dichotic dilemma, the input of the basic survival instinct to our every actions, and our perspective and presentation of life, powered by our relatively higher functioning minds as human beings on this planet, with every observable phenomenon based on a spectrum extending from one extreme to another, positive to negative. The vehicle for the argument being a reductionist assessment of the writings I wrote in my notepads, the poems, thoughts, and feelings, as I look for meaning and understanding of the human emotional state of being. So in essence, the book becomes an observation of the interplay between the emotional state and the logical balanced state of being, ignorance versus understanding, knowledge versus a lack of it, positive versus negative, essentially the dichotic dilemma, and how it affects our day-to-day existence from inter, micro to macro interaction with ourselves as human beings, the wider world, and the universe at large. I believe we transform the world through conversation. The people who created the greatest social change did so through the power of their words, ultimately. So, in the end, all I want to foster and all I want to create is conversation. Conversation about the things that matter. But more importantly, conversation, not discord. And I believe that appreciating the concept of the dichotic dilemma and ultimately the phenomenon of duality is the vehicle towards that. Thank you.